In this video, I will show you how to rationalize the denominator of an expression that has radicals in it, or square roots. Now the key is something called the conjugate. So if I have 1 plus radical 5, for example, the conjugate of that will be 1 minus radical 5. So you just change the sign. So watch what happens when I multiply these two things together. But before I get too carried away, understand that we have to always do the same thing in the numerator and the denominator. So I will have to multiply by 1 minus radical 5 in the numerator as well. But focus on the denominator, and I think I might do this off to the side where we have more space. So 1 plus radical 5 times 1 minus radical 5. We are going to FOIL this, or we're going to do the distributive property twice. So if I multiply everything by 1, that's just going to give me 1 minus radical 5 back again. But then I need to multiply each term by radical 5. So radical 5 times 1, that's going to be radical 5. Now, radical 5 times radical 5 is 5. I'm going to come back to that in a second, but a positive times a negative is going to be a negative. So I'm going to get negative 5. Focus on this for a moment. If I have radical 3 times radical 3, I want you to be able to just say the answer to that automatically. Sure, 3 times 3 is 9, but then the square root of 9 is 3. So I want you to go straight from this to this. So radical 3 times radical 3 is 3. Radical 5 times radical 5 is 5. That's what we ran into right then. What if I had radical, let's say 123 times radical 123? That would just be 123. Okay, so that's a good skill to have. Now, one of the reasons why it helps us to do the conjugate is because you will always get these like terms that cancel each other out. So this part always cancels out. So that just leaves me with 1 minus 5, which is negative 4. So that's why on my next step in the denominator here, I'm just going to have negative 4. Now, in the numerator, I am doing the distributive property, so this is going to become 2 minus 2 radical 5. All right, now I'm looking for ways to simplify this. The key is, if you want to be able to simplify, you have to be able to divide all three of these numbers by the same thing. So sometimes I like to put a heart around these numbers like this. All right, because that reminds me that I have two things in the top and one thing in the bottom. That's three things. All three of these numbers are divisible by 2. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to divide all of the numbers by 2. Okay, so if I do that, all right, 2 divided by 2 is 1. Negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1. And I've still got the radical 5 there. Negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2. So this is the answer right here. All right, now hopefully you understand that we don't really need this 1. 1 radical 5 is just radical 5. So I'm just going to erase the 1. And this is the best way to write the answer. 1 minus radical 5 over negative 2. Okay, let's keep practicing that. Look at the next problem. So the conjugate of this denominator is going to be 8 plus 2 radical 2. and I'll have to do the same thing in the numerator. 8 plus 2 radical 2. All right, and again, I'm going to multiply this out off to the side. Okay, 8 plus 2 radical 2 times 8. Oh, you know what? I made a small mistake just then. This is supposed to be the conjugate, so this should be minus. So 8 minus 2 radical 2. So if I do this kind of double distributive property, 8 times 8 is going to be 64. Then 8 times negative 2 radical 2 is going to be negative 16 radical 2. And then radical 2 times 8 is positive 16 radical 2. And then what about positive 2 radical 2 times negative 2 radical 2? Well, again, I feel like I should do that kind of off to the side. So, well, obviously a positive times a negative is going to be a negative. So I'm going to have a negative something. But what is 2 radical 2 times 2 radical 2? Well, let's just do the like parts together. So I've got 2 times 2, and I've also got radical 2 times radical 2. So if I do 2 times 2, that's going to give me 4. Now, radical 2 times radical 2 is just 2, like we talked about earlier. Now, what do I do with these numbers? I multiply them both together, and that's going to give me 8. So 2 radical 2 times 2 radical 2 is going to be 8. All right, so that's why I'm going to have minus 8 right here. As always, these numbers will cancel each other out, and that's going to leave me with 64 minus 8, which is 56. Okay, so now we can get back to the problem. So on my next step, I'm going to have 56 in the denominator. Now the numerator, I need to multiply these things out. So 9 radical 2 times 8 is going to be 72 radical 2. Now 9 radical 2 times negative 2 radical 2. Well, it's going to be minus something. Maybe we'll do this off to the side as well. All right, 9 radical 2 times 2 radical 2. All right, again, let's do 9 times 2 is 18. Radical 2 times radical 2 is going to be just 2. And then you have 18 times 2, which is 36. So that's why I'm simply going to have minus 36 right here. Okay, now I'm looking to see if there's something that will divide evenly into all of these numbers. I feel like they are all divisible by 4. I think they're all divisible by 4. So let's try that and see what happens. So I'm going to take this. Okay, I'm not worried about the radical 2, but the 72, the 36, and the 56, I'm going to divide all of them by 4 and see what happens. Okay, so let's see. 72 divided by 4 is 18. All right, so far I've got 18 radical 2. I know 36 divided by 4 is 9. Okay, what about 56? That's 14. Okay, so I'm glancing back at the remaining 3 numbers to see if there's anything else I can divide by, and I don't see anything. So this is going to be the answer. But you know what, there's one more step I think we should probably do. For standard form, we really want the radical to go second. So I'm just going to reverse these two numbers. So I'm going to take the -9 and put it in the front. And then I'm going to take the 18 radical 2 and put that second. All right, because this is considered standard form. You want the radical to be second. Your teacher might not care which order you put it in which case maybe your teacher would consider this to be the correct answer as well. But just in case. All right, so both of these are the same. Ask your teacher if you're allowed to just leave it like this. Okay, on the previous problem, the radical was already second, so I didn't have to think about it. All right, let's do a couple more. So on problem number 5, the conjugate would be 2 plus radical 2. All right, I'm going to do this off to the side. So I'm going to do 2 minus radical 2 times 2 plus radical 2. So 2 times 2 is 4. 2 times radical 2 is just 2 radical 2. Negative radical 2 times 2 is negative 2 radical 2. A negative times a positive will always be a negative, but then radical 2 times radical 2 is regular 2. These two terms cancel out as always. 4 minus 2 is 2. So on my next step, I'm going to have a 2 in the denominator. Now I'm distributing the 6. 6 times 2 is 12. And then 6 times radical 2 is 6 radical 2. Now, right away, you can see that all three of these numbers are all divisible by 2. They're all even. So we need to divide these three numbers by 2. And if I do that, I'm going to get 6 and 3 and 1. But of course, we don't need the 1 when it's in the denominator. Okay, so your final answer will just be 6 plus 3 radical 2. All right, let's do one more problem. And I encourage you to pause the video and try to do this problem by yourself, and then see if you got the right answer. So the conjugate would be 1 plus 3 radical 2. All right, I'm going to do this off to the side. So I've got 1 minus 3 radical 2 times 1 plus 3 radical 2. Okay, 1 times 1 is 1. 1 times 3 radical 2 is 3 radical 2. Negative 3 radical 2 times 1 is negative 3 radical 2. And then I've got this. So one more time, a negative times a positive is definitely a negative. But now I've got to do 3 radical 2 times 3 radical 2. I'm going to do that off to the side as well. 3 times 3 is 9. Radical 2 times radical 2 is just 2. Multiply those and you get 18. These cancel out as always. 1 minus 18 is negative 17. So in the denominator, I'm going to have this negative 17. In the numerator, I'm going to distribute the radical 2. Radical 2 times 1 is radical 2. Okay, now if I do radical 2 times 3 radical 2, which I'm going to do right here, okay, radical 2 times 3 radical 2. This is like having 1 radical 2 times 3 radical 2. So I've got 1 times 3 is just going to stay 3. Then I've got radical 2 times radical 2 is regular 2. And then I've got 3 times 2, which is 6. So I'm going to have 6 right here. Okay, there's nothing common to all 3. I mean, this is like a 1. So this is the final answer. Your teacher may want you to put the radical second, in which case you would have 6 plus radical 2 over negative 17. All right, so that is how you can simplify an expression that involves radicals by rationalizing the denominator. Alright guys, that's going to do it for this video. Go ahead and click here in the red apple to watch the next video. Click in the green apple to subscribe, or click the yellow apple for the full playlist.